right, it is 1 o'clock. All right, it's 1 o'clock, and we have a very, very, very full schedule. So let's go ahead and get started. I think Warren, you wanted to make a couple of comments, requests.
More like a plea. So if people wouldn't mind, would you all please join the IETF-NAT64 network and use it a bunch and make sure it works? We've had a number of people using it, but we'd like more people using it. And the hope is then in Bangkok, we might be able to do a IPv6 mostly by default network. Unfortunately, they shut down the monitoring servers a short while ago, so we're not going to be able to collect useful stats. Great. But I mean, if people can let me know if stuff doesn't work. As far as we know, everything should be fine. The only things we've seen is some people seem to have issues connecting to Slack images, but we think that that's client software that is filtering software on their machine. And if you don't have CLAT, you won't be able to ping v4 addresses. I figured I wouldn't need to mention that here, but in other places, people are like, I've got a Windows machine, I can't ping 8888. Oh, the password's IETF, IETF. Hopefully that wasn't put in the recording because...
John Linkova, I would say if you are not on NAT64 network, you are disqualified from being in the room, actually.
And if the scribe could not put the password, the super secret password in.
Yeah, and I actually think it would be interesting data point. If you do see Slack issues, please check with your IT if you have any content filtering on your laptop installed, because we're trying to correlate that fact to having content filtering software on the machine.
Yeah, as I say, that's the main thing that we've seen is certain images don't load in Slack, like the emojis, and it's kind of weird. The other thing is obviously if you have something like a VPN and it sets DNS servers, you won't be able to get the DNS64 and stuff might not work, but presumably people in this room already know that.
Great. So everybody join that network if you can. All right. So this is the IETF note well. We should all know this. We're going to go over it anyway. If you're aware that any IETF contribution is covered by patents or patents that that are owned or controlled by you or your sponsor, you must disclose that. As a participant, you agree to any IETF activity you acknowledge. Written, audio, video, and photographic records of meetings may be made public. Personal information is handled in accordance with the policy state or the privacy statement, and we're all on the same team. We want to work together. Everybody be respectful, and let's get some things done. All right. Housekeeping, please scan the QR code so that you can participate in the Meet Echo and mute your mics if you can, and also please join the meeting queue before you walk up to the mic. All right, like I said, very, very full agenda today. We got 3 working group drafts, 4 individual, and 2 if we have time. So all that said, let's go to the next slide. We have some draft progress. We've got 2 RFCs, documentation space, and DHCP PD per device that are now have numbers. We have last call that is working its way through that process is the ND considerations draft. So we've got a fair amount of progress that's going on, and we're looking for some more. Call for contributions to important works. As always, the last few times we've asked that if you have knowledge, time, and desire and motivation, please contribute to the IPv6 textbook. It's at a point now where it's actually, I think, usable. I've had a lot of comments, unicast comments to me about this and how people have enjoyed reading it. It's actually a pretty easy read. My colleague at work sat down and read it in one night, and he did all the type editing for us, which was really nice. Did that at the same time. So you just need a GitHub account. If you want to participate, please do. With that, we also have some things that we'd like to work on within the working group. And as always, we want feedback on these. If you have more ideas, let us know. If you think these ideas are sort of out of line, also let us know. You can look at the list here. I'm not going to read all of them, but I think the first couple are they're all pretty relevant, right? Or else we wouldn't be looking at them. So please take a look at those. If you want to participate in helping with these new tasks that we're pointing in the direction of, let us know, and we can start doing that. Go ahead.
Okay.
All right.
We move on to the.
Yep. Gonna move on to the first speaker, which is Jen.
Because James will have 2 consecutive sessions, so we'll also combine the timer.
Hello, I'm Jen. I deploy V6 only for living. Then we try to document what we've done. The draft got an additional author since last time. So, or 2 additional authors since last time, I don't remember. So, like Nick deployed V6 only, Andre deployed V6 mostly at Ripe meeting, I'm deploying it in the office. So, and surprisingly, our experience more or less consistent. And recommendations we want to do or more or less consistent. So here is a draft. Next slide, please. So yeah, just to recap, what we're trying to document is if you want to deploy, what is IPv6 mostly network, how you deploy it, why would you do that, and what kind of things you can expect, what could possibly go wrong, and what you need to consider, because some of the problem might not be applicable to you, or some of them might be theoretically a showstopper and so on. So next slide, please. Yeah, so the draft was adopted. Thank you very much. And yeah, I've created a link to the diff because apparently it's not obvious in data tracker how you can get diff between individual draft and 0.0 of adopted draft. You have to craft a URL manually. Next slide, please. So yeah, so basically we slightly rephrased IPv6 only endpoints because it's not a technical term, right? It's a kind of policy decision. The host might just be V6. We normally say in V6 only capable endpoint is endpoint which works on V6 only network, right? And it might mean that endpoint only need to talk to 5 IPv6 only enabled servers and that's it. Or it might be because it runs CLAT, or maybe there are other way to ensure that it's V6 only capable. So it's up to network administrator to decide. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we decided to be a little less biased and replace the benefits section with section which called solution analysis, when we, instead of just talking about benefits, talking about like considerations which might be perceived as cons. For example, I know that some people, when they hear about deploying NAT 6.4, they're like, oh my God, I'm deploying NAT in IPv6 network. No. Or it's like, oh, it's a new element in my network, which means, oh, I'm increasing complexity. However, it should be noticed that if you are not at IETF network, you're most likely already using NAT 4.4. Most of the other networks just do NAT 4.4 anyway, right? And it's very easy just to enable NAT 6.4 on the same box, on the same functionality. So it's not really drastic increase in complexity. So yeah, so we now have 2 sections about comparing pros and cons of V6 mostly versus dual stack and V6 mostly versus doing V6 only with potential fallback network. Next slide, please. Yeah, so V6 mostly versus dual stack. Yeah, as I said, we not anymore saying that it's simplified deployment because on V6 mostly you still have V4, but we're saying that it allows you to do controlled incremental migration to V6 only and slowly phase out of IPv4, but it does simplify troubleshooting, at least for V6 only hosts, because you do not have this confusion of happy eyeballs. And yeah, and I say NAT 6.4, yeah, new element, but it's already there most likely in the form of NAT 4.4. And the good thing, fingers crossed, right? We do not expect that you would need to scale them up. We theoretically should see decrease of V4 only traffic going outside to the internet. So probably, yeah, you don't need to scale stuff. Next slide, please. Yeah, other changes. Based on list feedback, we added a section about on-link communication and prefix discovery because, yes, if you have v4 only host and v6 only host on the same link, they might have some difficulties talking to each other directly. It needs to be considered. However, again, there are networks when it's not a problem because such communication is explicitly prohibited or at least not desirable, right? I'm deploying a lot of network segments when I do not want hosts to talk to each other at all. I will prevent them by any means possible. For rollback, Andre added a good point that if you're doing fallback SSID, which is not V6 mostly and properly dual stack, it makes sense to rotate SSID name for every conference, like RIPE is doing it currently. So when you go to RIPE, the primary RIPE SSID stays the same all the time, and it's V6 mostly. But fallback, dual stack SSID, just changing the name. So it's RIPE 88, RIPE 89, and so on, which prevents user devices just connect to it because they remembered. You need to put some effort into connecting to it. I would actually say just exchange the password for the bug report. So you should only get a password for that SSID if you report an issue. It might be. I'm actually deadly serious. If you connect to it, we need to know why, right? It's probably an issue. If it's an issue being reported, great, you can connect to it. But just stealing someone an IPv4 precious, expensive v4 address, no. So it was some discussion previously about privacy considerations on the draft. And text is now updated saying there is no new privacy considerations because V6 mostly is a kind of superposition of V6 only and dual stacks. So we all know, right, what privacy implications of V6 are and what privacy implications of V4. So there is nothing really new here. Next slide, please. Yes, so I would appreciate if people in the room deploy IPv6 mostly network and tell us how it goes and what is missing in the draft. Well, you can tell us what's missing in the draft even without deploying it, but experience would be appreciated. Draft is actually very stable. However, the authors do not think it should go to the last call because I know that Warren has some plans to do V6 mostly at larger scale than it's now. And I do believe that 1,500 geeks could discover new issues and problems and considerations, which might lead to some updated text in the draft. So hopefully, yeah, we probably need to keep this document alive for a few more IETFs and see what IETF NOC experience is and how they could contribute. So that's it for this draft. So we have more time for next exciting discussion. But meantime, comments?
David Lamparter, since you mentioned moving the IETF to IPv6 mostly, we will probably try doing this at CCC Congress at the end of this year. That's 15,000 hackers. And depending on how well that goes, I will try my best to collect any bugs and issues and feedback that we find there.
Great. Thank you.
So
Who's-
Nick
who's else?
Braulio, that's me. Along with similar to his comments, we're probably going to run this at the supercomputing conference in a couple weeks. So
You're a co-author. You don't even need to send the PR, just commit to main.
yeah, I know. I'm just
Eh.
saying, things are happening.
Great. So next. No questions? So we can go to the next one then. Oh, Nick, Tim.
Hi, Tim Chan. I can't get on Meet Echo, sorry, because I was playing with NAT 6.4 and something else broke.
Good
I
excuse.
broke something else and it's my fault. So just to say, and you're aware of it, and just for the room's benefit, there is a UK university that's running IPv6 mostly on around 5,000 access points now. It's the biggest UK university in London. And that's also running Eduroam, which is available here. So there are visitors coming from other universities to the Eduroam SSID, getting V6 only via the mostly, and using it without being aware of it, and they're not getting complaints.
I'm actually now thinking that maybe for the next time we can do it very 5-minute summary who is doing this or whom we know about, right? So this could be point to people who are scared of doing this. So like those networks done it and everyone survived so far, so it's not as scary as you might think.
Yes.
Yeah, and there's a report of David's thing at an event you are aware of quite soon. So we'll
Ah.
send a link to that
Brilliant.
slides and the recording when it happens later this month.
Okay, now we have 21 minutes for much more exciting and controversial stuff. So lessons learned. Tommy made those slides well in advance, like a week in advance. And as a result, I have to remove most of them and change them because by Friday, everything, well, not everything, a lot of things have changed. So CLAT recommendations. We all aware about 464 CLAT. What? What do you mean? I took them from the IETF website. No. I am adding them at the end. It's first two have not changed, so I kept them. So we have an RFC which defines 464 XLAT. However, when I was talking to implementers, we found out that it's not actually clear, like how the translation is clear. But there are a lot of unclear things about when do you start CLAT, when do you stop it, right? What do you actually do with information network provides you and all those things. So since the last time, we made some changes. First of all, yes, we're saying the CLAT must use pref64 in array option if it's provided. Is it say should? I think we kind of say may, at least in one place. Now I'm confused. But anyway, the question is what to do with if pref64 is not provided by the network in array. So I think it's say may use 7050, but anyway, the question is, yes, 7050 can be used as a fallback. However, there is a draft in DNSOP about which iterated it and saying, please try not to use 7050 because it has a number of issues. And I have a number of slides here which were added this morning, which explaining what kind of issues you might see. We explicitly saying that Slack 464 CLAT addresses should be treated as temporary, so they might be rotated if the device stays for a while. It's not a real issue because you really do not see CLAT address outside of your network edge, but still. Andre suggested that we change the definition of having native V4 connectivity because we basically still want to explicitly say that if device has IPv4, it should not run CLAT because it might mean that you are actually on a dual stack network and we do not want attacker to trick you into believing that you have NAT6 on the network. So initially we were saying if you have non-link local V4 address, please stop CLAT. Currently we're changing it to a default native IPv4 route pointing to that interface. Yes, an MTU issue. Obviously, as soon as, like when you have an IPv4 packet, when it's translated to V6, the packet size increases. So it would be highly desirable that whatever V4-only application uses CLAT interface and default route is not trying to send too much onto the link. Eric?
Eric Vink. I think if this IPv4 packet is a fragment, you need to add the fragment header and reduce the MTU again.
Oh.
Easy to fix, right?
Yeah, thank you. Good. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, yes, that's a probably wrong slide because I think I fixed it. So about open questions, it's not none in the moment. We have 10 more slides which talking about open questions. The thing is, when we're talking about them, please keep in mind that Jordi is going to talk about moving 464 XLAT into standard. So we are basically talking about something which might be promoted to standard, but Lorenzo?
So if you rewind one slide, I wanted to ask about the why the should for SAC addresses. I mean, it's easy for us to ignore that, but like, why? What's the benefit? This is really annoying to do.
You want to keep them like stable, not rotate them.
I mean, they have to be checksum neutral, so they have to be like carefully generated anyway. What's
fine?
The point, right?
I like to be honest. I don't even remember. Tell me, do you remember why they should be rotated?
Consistency. Like, we didn't have necessarily a strong motivating factor, but at the same time, why should
then just leave it to implementations. We can just say nothing about it and leave it to implementations. Yeah.
On the other hand, why should we remove the temporary just because we're using it in this case?
I guess we can.
You mean, sorry, does it say from the perspective of APIs? Like if you like the IPv6 prefer source public thing, or like, oh, just like why would you rotate them?
Why would you not rotate them?
Well, I mean, because one of them is in the kernel, one is in the user space, for example. I mean, maybe that's a good reason not to do the show. I don't know.
I guess we can say either say nothing or say or whatever, do whatever you want because it doesn't really matter. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I don't have a strong opinion. If the group wants to remove the normative, we can just say, keep in mind, you should make a decision either way.
Okay, next slide, please. Yes, so next slide, please. Let's go to the really interesting stuff. So Philip, thank you very much. Philip opened a can of worms about multi-homing and multi-prefix behavior here. So ideally, on the high level, let's say we have a host, V6 only host on a network. It gets a prefix and a PIO at format 464 CLAT address. Then we add a new router on the network because I want my home network or my office network to be multi-homed. We are adding another CLAT address, and both of them work. If one router is taken away, rule 5.5 should not select the address. Actually, this is also my favorite case, and I've been talking the whole week about that, renumbering or changing network attachment, right? If my wired desktop moved from one network to another quietly without noticing it, this is how it should behave because I'm moving to another VLAN and my CLAT should continue working even on the new network. Next slide, please. What's happening in real life? It's not that. So what I observed, if my device, let's say workstation, moves between different VLANs, temporary addresses are formed obviously from all the new prefix. Rule 5.5 takes care of the host selecting the correct source temporary V6 address for outgoing communication, but CLAT keeps using the old address, the only one it picked up a while ago, and as a result, the users report issues. Yeah, sometimes some internet websites are not reachable, which means like CLAT is basically broken. Everything else works, but everything which goes through CLAT is broken. And Philip basically started all this discussion reporting that if router sends two PIOs, global and ULA, we need a term, non-ULA global and ULA, two PIOs, CLAT picks up ULA to form a source, to form CLAT address. And if you cannot reach your NAT6 device from ULA, you have problem. So yeah, we're obviously having a problem with how to treat multiple prefixes cases. Lorenzo?
You talk about source address selection. Are you sort of implying that source address selection is aware of the CLAT address? Because from the perspective of the application, the CLAT is a V4 socket, right? And so source address selection might, depending on the implementation, definitely in our implementation, source address selection picks the V4 address.
Yes, we try to put some text. We try to put some text in the draft. Please take a look and tell us if we need to clarify more. But we definitely going to deal, fortunately, unless we all expect NAT6.6 to be everywhere, we're going to have a situation when you have multiple CLAT addresses and you need to do something about selecting the right one. It's a recent addition to the text. We definitely, I'm not saying it's perfect, right? So let's think about how we can phrase it. I think we currently, actually I have a slide on this. Can you go to the next slide, I think? Yes, so basically what we're saying initially, until we found this issue, CLAT should create an address from each PIO it receives. The same 5 tuples should go to the same CLAT address. And this CLAT address should be like advertised, will be sent to the right router, right? I guess it's possible that you picking up CLAT address which cannot go anywhere, yeah, which is bad. Maybe we need more work. But actually, the rest of the slides are about this. So maybe we can table this discussion. Let me finish. And if I'm not suggesting anything which can...
I don't see a way to implement the must. Just FYI. I have no idea how to do that.
Maybe we can just say what implications of not implementing it is, because it's definitely like... I don't know when you have, if you have, maybe it should be different CLAT instances using different V6 addresses, in which case you obviously, as long as you're using the same V4 source, right? You're going to use the same V6 source and the problem is solved, right? Yeah, I told you it's going to be interesting discussion in the mic today. I don't have solution yet. Those slides were created like 2 hours ago.
Yes, so the source address selection stuff, I would phrase it rather differently. We don't do source address selection before the packet entered the CLAT, but you may want to do source selection for packets leaving the CLAT
yes.
on the V6 side. If you're thinking about that model to implement...
No, hold on.
Yes.
Hold on, Philip.
Now, and now the point is, if you want to have A, CLAT being stateless, and B, supporting that the rule that a packet keep to the same file type, the only chance you have is doing source address selection for the CLAT once you instantiate it and stick to that address. And
you can stick to the address, right? But wait. First of all, actually, the text, this text and text in the draft does not say rule 5.5. It says actually 8028, which says as long as you select the CLAT address, please send it to the right router. Because you... Wait, have I just said something funny? No, just like an obvious thing to say. We have an RFC which says should and like, yeah, anyway. Next slide, please. So, okay, so this is current text. However, apparently, we've been thinking about perfect ideal case, right? You have 2 routers, 2 PIOs, well, N routers, N PIOs, all of them advertising you prefix 4 with the same prefix, right? All good. Rule 5.5 or 8028 help you to send packets to the right router. Next slide, please. However, what if we have 2 routers advertising 2 PIOs with different prefix 4? This all like gets very ugly very soon, right? So now your CLAT implementation needs to remember which address use which prefix 4 because you cannot mix and match, right? And you need to translate to the right destination. And after you translate the right destination, you need to pick up the right next hop. Horrible. Next slide, please. Also, we can theoretically get into a situation when you're on V6 only network and only some routers send you prefix 4. This is like what we are supposed to do with blue address in this case. Strictly speaking, you have no rights to assume that router B is capable of sending packets to NAT64, right? Because it might be, maybe that router doesn't support prefix 4, maybe that network actually using the different NAT64 prefix, so you don't know, right? So suggestion is that probably we must not be using source addresses if they were not advertised in array without prefix 4, right? Because it means that router cannot guarantee you, cannot tell you NAT64 prefix. Next slide, please. If there is, then what's happened if there is no array with prefix 4? Well, as we say, I think we're saying we might fall back to 7050. 7050 saying very scary things about you must look for all quad answers from DNS64 and use all of those prefixes, and that this is only gonna work if configuration is consistent between networks, right? So if you have 2 networks using different NAT64 prefixes and you try to use 7050, it's never gonna work at all, ever, right? You have no way of knowing without implementing PVD, some sort of PVD, knowing I resolved this quad A through this DNS64 and I got an answer and I got another answer from another DNS64 and doing real hard like PVD stuff. There is no way it works, right? So it's not recommended, obviously. So I guess, next slide, please. What we are proposing to say, it's not in the draft yet because we've been discussing it this week only. If array contains prefix 4, only use PIOs from those arrays. Ignore all arrays without prefix 4. And if there is no prefix 4, well, you may use 7050, which means whatever, use all PIOs, right? We intentionally tried until this week to avoid discussing a scenario what happens if your prefix 4 changed on the fly when your CLAT is running. This is an ugly case. I actually think we shall either declare it out of scope and say just shut it down and start again, right? Because if you already have CLAT running and prefix 4 config changed, I don't know. Next slide, please. Question from, which I just realized this morning, what to do if you get multiple prefix 4 in one or multiple arrays, right? I don't know what CLAT can do. Do you need different CLAT instances per prefix 4, or one instance can do this? I'd like to hear from implementers. Or we can just say, okay, don't do this, right? If you do this, like you're on your own, we don't know what's gonna happen. And if you're an operator, only use prefix 4, non-well-known prefix 4 if you're absolutely sure there is no other way your host would get another prefix 4, right? On enterprise network, I can guarantee that. I know I'm only sending you prefix 4. In home environment, there is no guarantee. So maybe it just should be operational considerations. Lorenzo.
So I'm trying to understand what the thrust of the draft is, because from an operational perspective, you were on your own 5 slides ago. Like, it stopped working a long time ago. So if we're trying to design something, that's maybe a different question. I don't know what this kind of document, which way do you see this document? Is it more designing the future behavior and like trying to figure out how to do it? Or is it more operational, or?
All of the above. What I mean is, there are people in the room who are trying to implement CLAT, right? So this document needs to provide them guidance on how to do this so it's not broken on my network. We probably don't want existing things to break. If something does not work fundamentally because we never defined how the behavior should be, let's talk about it, because we have options. We can say, okay, just don't do this. We don't know how to make it work. Don't do this. The question is, can we expect people still do this? Or because maybe it's theoretical corner case which never ever should happen unless it's a broken network topology. Or it might be a practically realistic use case, and then it would be really nice to address it somehow.
So, I mean, like, I'm still stuck on this like 5-tuple thing where, you know.
Okay, we can talk about, like, are you really concerned if you have only one source address, if you have one instance of CLAT per address,
it's
V4 or V6, you don't have that problem, right?
That is stateless transition. It doesn't do tuples.
No, Lawrence, okay. I think we can solve this, but say in one CLAT instance, use only one address, and that.
But then you need another IPv4 address.
Yes, we have 8 of them, Lorenzo.
8? Okay, and then?
Well,
and then it stops working.
We will ask Ayana for more if you need more, right? I thought Ayana has some additional addresses somewhere.
Oh, so maybe then we actually make.
We already say, we're already saying this. We're already saying each instance should use dedicated address. It's currently.
I mean, I'm just saying, like, yeah, we turn something that is like clearly defined as stateless into something that's stateful, and just.
No, I think we can talk about, like, we can probably ask for a bigger subnet if you think it helps, but I don't think it's the biggest problem here. The biggest problem is what to do with multiple prefixes, multiple routers on the same link advertising you different informations. I think this is a much bigger problem.
Tim Winters, QA Cafe. So my question for the multiple options here, do people actually try to not rip and replace these ever? Is there ever a reason for someone to renumber these gracefully? That would be my only question for having to support multiples of these. I don't know if anyone does that, but if they do, you'd need to figure that out.
Well, the thing is, you currently, like, both mechanisms of discovery and prefix 4 allows you to get multiple prefixes, and because in array option RFC we try to follow 70/50 recommendations, host is allowed to use them. We can declare just don't do this. We can say you can't gracefully renumber CLAT. Just bad luck.
Well, it's not graceful anymore.
Yeah. You can renumber, but not graceful, right? Who cares about communications to with-only destinations, right, in a graceful way? Yeah, we can say that.
David Lamparter, I also think the 5-tuple thing is confused. We have 8 possible CLAT instances we can support because we have 8 IPv4 addresses. Each of those should map to exactly one IPv6 address that we own on the CLAT.
Okay.
We need to make sure we make the correct routing decision for stuff that V6 endpoint 8 on, yes. Sure, if you have more than 8, you're in a very weird network.
Okay.
I think this 5-tuple stuff does derail the discussion. I don't think it's our biggest problem now. So okay, David, let's assume 5 tuples text will be removed for sake of the discussion because we have 1 minute and I see 2 people in the queue or 3 people in the queue. Okay.
So, Eric, very quickly, I think the problem is real. One way of solving it is to consider the pair of prefix 4 and local V6 addresses as an interface and do
slide,
ECMP.
Please. Next slide, please. Well, with ECMP, it's like for the given session, you can do ECMP because, okay, can I quickly, we have 2 more slides. So there is a question is how many PIOs in a given array you're going to use? You can use one of them or all of them. Again, there are pros and cons. It's not in the text. I'd like to hear opinion on the list. And next slide, please. Yeah, that's it. Now
we have many comments. I mean, the 5-tuple thing I think is easily solvable. Do the translation, hash that, and take it mod the number of addresses, and then make you selected one automatically. There's no state.
You'll explain that to me later. I have one comment about if you go back. Yeah, this is more complicated than anything else the host is doing. One thing I would suggest maybe to simplify this is, can we use the prefix 4 configuration as a implicit source dest route, because it kind of is an implicit source dest route, like the prefix.
Great.
And the prefix 4 are kind of source and destination. And so if you do that, it kind of just becomes a Seder problem. And we don't know how to do Saber and we do have to write it down, but I think maybe it can simplify this because this is just
yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, thank you. Okay. Yeah. And I think we're out of time.
Yep. We are out of time. Just take it to the list and let's have some lively discussion on there.
I told you.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm here about actually 2 drafts. So one of them is completed working group last call. That is the first one listed there. So that's the CPE land draft. And just as a reminder for everybody, this is just trying to get home gateways, the IPv6 CE version, which is basically don't configure routers. These are not enterprise routers, just to remind everybody. These are ones that come from ISPs or that you would pick up at a retail place and plug into your house or a small business. That one I think has finished working group last call, and I think we're ready to advance that one. Go ahead, go to the next slide. And so most of my slides today, yeah, so here we go. Yeah, this one completed working group last call. We did a couple of good things. As part of that working group last call, we added ULAs to the PD. That was not something that we had previously done or wasn't really mentioned. It was possible, but not called out. It is now. And then we added some additional text for reminding home gateways to honor lifetimes correctly because they don't often do that. And that's it. So I think this is ready to go. So I'll keep that one quick. Any comments on that draft? If you have any, please send them, but I think we're good. All right, next one. Okay, here's the other one. So one thing that's come up for a couple of people, there was a different version of this draft that had the underscore before biz that Jordy did many years ago that turned into 8585. So if you find a dead draft, you're on the wrong one. Several people have texted me about this and I'm like, no, you're on the wrong one. I don't know how to fix it. Just go to the V6OPS page and it's right. A couple of things. Number one, PCP is a should after last IETF. We had a very long mic line. We've left it as a should right now. Come up and yell at me if you think it should be stronger than that. I'm not sure. I haven't seen it in every CPE. It's in some of them. So I think this is a good place for us to land on this. The only other thing we added since adoption was we upgraded the text for S2 to say ingress filtering should be enabled by default, but users must be able to turn it off. It was should, and several people wanted the ability to actually turn it off, so we changed that. And next steps, next slide. Okay, so we're kind of in a weird state. We did a bunch of really good stuff in this document. We cleaned it up. It's got all the latest RFCs, which is important. You'd be surprised how many people are trying to do 2460 things when they should be doing 8200 things for the old version. DHCP got updated. Transition mechanisms is much cleaner. The old one, I had a vendor recently come to me and said, hey, I read 7084. I'm doing 6RD and I had a heart attack. And said, please don't read that and do that. So part of me says we need to get this out the door because people read 7084 and make decisions based upon that. But we also have the situation we have these 3 drafts are candidates here. I think Snack has some things going on as well this is a constant thing we have going on where we're trying to pick the point where we want to actually push this out the door. And so I think V6OPS has a milestone for this in December of 25, I want to say, for this draft.
I think so.
That sounds right. Okay, so I think that's a good place for us to be. I think there are 3 drafts that we should talk about. And if people have thoughts, including them or discluding them, now's your chance. Go ahead, Ross.
Ross, you can ask your question.
Well, then
maybe we'll move
to Lorenzo.
Clarification question. Do you believe that you're not going to update this document again?
No, that's a good point, right? I think
Let's just tee them up for the next release.
that's the other option here, right? Is we could put this out, try to aim for the next IETF, which will then turn into the November IETF, right? We could try to aim to get this out next IETF and
Ship
say,
it
hey,
and
we're done.
start working on the TRIS or BIS or Progress or
great.
whatever.
Yeah, I'm forever doing this draft. That's fine.
Well, no,
Or
you'll
story of
you'll publish it,
Yeah,
and then you'll publish it again.
yeah, it'll just be a running thing. Yeah, I think that's the reality of this doc for sure, is that it needs to be updated. It's been a little long this time. I think there's a lot more going on in this space. So yeah, I think that's a good call. So maybe we'll go with that and leave these depending on their states.
Can I ask an unrelated question, or should I do it at the end?
No,
Oh, that's the last one.
Fire away.
Can I please have text saying don't send arrays at stupid intervals with stupid lifetimes?
Okay, I'm open to this conversation. I've seen some really great stuff. We had a router the other day that tried to tank our network. It sent them every 0.05 seconds. Just spammed them.
Stylish. The one in the apartment that I'm staying here is 12-second lifetimes.
Yeah,
Stylish. So yeah, I mean, you know what? I think maybe we should say should use this number because people seem to be incapable of.
I think actually maybe that's something we should consider doing. Yeah.
That's something I would actually want to converge on before we think of this.
Yeah, we'll throw something. Maybe I'll throw some text in there for the RA interval. This seems to be a struggle for people, amazingly. Hey, Ted.
Yeah. So actually, I guess I was going to say, God, we really need Slack renum, or we really need CPE LAN PD. But actually, I think what you just said kind of addresses the reason why I think we need Slack renum. So maybe we don't. I still kind of want CPE LAN PD though.
Yeah, that one, I mean, it'll get called. I think we could try to jam it in there afterwards. We're going to see how much is left over. We did them as separate documents because we weren't sure how long 7084 biz being open was going to be.
Yeah, LAN PD, I mean, hopefully we'll ship it and we can ship it about the same time. Slack renum, if you get the timers right, I think it's probably not too big an issue. And GULLA is not ready really, is it? I mean, how fast do you think you can?
Yeah, I think Slack renum, I think we can definitely take parts of that. We'll take a look at it. I'd have to go back and look.
Jen Linkova. So I see, I'm obviously biased, right? So
Yeah.
I see we have a very good reason to merge link, prefix link local and Slack renum. So you have only 2 drafts on your slide, right? But anyway, well, it's what discussed on 6man, right? But anyway, right? I really actually want my draft to progress fast, right? Actually, link is wrong here, now 6man. But anyway, I think we can, I would prefer, obviously, to have it included. And if it's not ready by the time it's going to publication stage could probably be removed, right? We'll see how fast we can progress this one.
Okay, well, I'll talk with my co-authors and we'll consider that.
Because I still say, because in my experience, it's useful and I believe it solves the problem. So I guess it would be nice to get it out earlier than like.
Yeah, I have some. I'll be curious if we think how helpful that is for home gateways or unmanaged gateways.
I know
have
that
some
David
thoughts.
has implementation, so we can try it.
Am I off the hook? Is that everybody? All right. So what I heard, a couple of things. One is hopefully we'll get PD draft done. I think that one's all set. It just needs a document shepherd. The 7084 biz, I think we'll go forward as it is now and try to maybe incorporate a couple of these other things where we can and kind of move forward, aiming for, aiming to have something that people can one last shot at in whatever the next in Bangkok.
Ross, did you want to try to ask your question again or make your comment?
We cannot hear you.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
Maybe we'll go to Tim.
Yep.
Yeah, throw it in the chat room too. We can answer it there.
Yes.
Hi, Tim Chen. I'm going to ask the question I asked you before.
Oh,
Now is
yeah.
the time to ask it, or?
Yeah, no, go ahead, please.
So, yeah, I was looking at the LAN PD thing. I don't want to reopen that, but coming up with the Slack renum and some of the things we've been talking about, ULAs as well. When you do the PD, say your house reboots, or you unplug a router and then bring it back later and plug it in again. Is there anything we say anywhere about how the lifetimes of the lease for the IAPD, or the expectation that if you plug back in, you might get the same prefix, or do we not care about that?
We care a little bit. I'm going to use a lot of quotes and say the words "in theory." So in theory, what should happen is this: a good CE router should have a real DHCP server, and it would keep the leases stored someplace. And if it got turned on and back on, it would just honor the leases with the real time. So if the lease was set to 2 days and it went offline and came back on, all the hosts would not get renumbered or something, right? I say good because my mileage has varied with this. When I've looked into this, there are definitely CPEs when they get rebooted, all of their leases are gone. They don't keep them anywhere. They're flash storage, whatever excuse you want to give them, they are not tracking that information. It sits in runtime memory, and that is the only place it sits. So
assigned by hashing. That's what DNSMax does. It works kind of well.
right. Some people yes, you get the same address. Sometimes you don't, depending on what it's doing, right? But at the same time, I think you don't notice it because of that, right? It's not that they're actually keeping track of the lease, and if you send them a renew, they'll say no binding or something worse, right? Because what will happen is the server comes back up, and then the client sends it a renew, and it's like, I've never seen you before in my life. Go away, right? And so it works. It's just not great. So I think one thing we could do is, I think in 7084 biz, we could say, hey, you should keep these leases. The reason it's going to be a should is there will be somebody with no flash storage and have no way to keep persistent data. They'll hash it. It'll still work. It's not great.
But I should say that. Otherwise, they would.
You're going to get me in trouble here because the DHCP V6, the 8415 doesn't have any of that text in there. So I would like to avoid creating new things for DHCP servers.
I mean, 8415, as Bernie defined it, runs on big iron that has disk, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
I mean, if you look, it's kind of funny. If you look at 8415 biz, right, or 8415, it says very little about this. It says bindings and server local information database. That is literally the words that it says. And so you can kind of take that as you want.
But does it mention anything about default timers or anything like that?
No, I mean, this is kind of to Lorenzo's points. 7084 does not have a whole lot of defaults. It basically defaults to the people who made the protocol. So ND, it uses the default values from DHCP v6, ND, and all the other ones. Yeah. Something to discuss. Maybe we should put a couple of defaults in there. We have not. Slack renum has a bunch, right? They're overriding a bunch of the default values. I think we could leverage those too.
I was just curious. Thanks.
Yep.
Seeing if we have a couple of minutes left. So for I hate to say this, but for CP LAN PD, like the ULA, like the welcome sort of like addition of ULA at the end. I mean, how deeply have you folks thought about that? Like one thing that I can see is that there's some text that says you must make the prefixes available by DHCP6. And I wouldn't want a CPE vendor to say, oh, I must make these ULAs available, but I can only support one prefix per client. So I'm just going to give them the ULA and not the GUA. That you should make sure that your text makes it clear that that is not allowed.
Yeah, okay. We can, before we ship it, I can add some text about that. You're right. Somebody might do that.
And
Sad as that makes me.
And the other thing is like do we have any indication that like CPEs or PD per device implementations will even do anything reasonable if you give them two prefixes? Because I really doubt it. I mean, our implementation certainly didn't for a while support anything but the first one. So maybe like I would sort of like be careful about this ULA stuff in general. But if we do want to have it, we would say, well, make sure the ULA appears second in the request in the advertise or something.
Yeah, when we added ULAs, or when I added that to the PD draft, I was actually surprised. There are 2 implementations in the world that do this already that I did not know.
No, I'm talking about clients. Do the clients get it right?
Well, the clients I don't know about that, but this case for LAN PD, we're really just saying, hey, we should be giving out the PD from.
Okay, but like if we give out this, and then if we
well, that's
if we
your
only give out
problem,
one,
man.
no, I'm not the client here. You're the client.
No, I'm on the other side of this.
No. The device.
No, you were definitely the client in this scenario,
I'm the
Lorenzo.
client for sure, but you are also the client. Your 7084 device is also the client. So if a 7084 or if a LAN PD device hands out 2 prefixes, and the CP south of that like loses its poor.
Well, that's no longer just to be clear, that's no longer a 7084 router, right? 7084 routers sit only at the edge of the ISP. Now, Ulay's not here. Yeah. Okay. Ulay's not here.
Scope.
Ulay's not here to have this heart attack, right? He used to always lose his mind about this subject because he wanted to write the intermediate router, the one that you're discussing, that is sort of a 7084 router with a little bit of sprinkles on top.
So you're saying that if I take a router and I plug it into my SP, it's a 7084 router.
Yes.
Then I buy another one, I put it in there, and it's not a 7084 router.
No.
Is there text that supports this
Yes.
version? There is text.
Yes. This is the text that Ulay originally wrote and yells at me about every time I try to do anything other than that.
Okay, fine. I guess like you won that. Like
He's not here anymore, so maybe we could do it. But
you
yeah.
won that text battle. The other thing though is like in the real world, like when you plug in one of these things southbound, do they fall over when you give them 2 prefixes?
Typically, they don't accept more than one, right?
Do they pick the ULA?
If it's first.
Well, then say it shouldn't be first at least. I mean, I wouldn't, like I said, GUA, but whatever. If you want to keep the ULA there, then at least say
Yeah, I mean,
first.
what they'll do, in my experience, is if it's whatever's first, man.
Then we should say, because there might exist.
Fine. Fine.
David Lamparter, I don't think the DHCP stuff will give you any trouble if you say hash to form addresses, because DHCP is very careful to tiptoe around not prescribing any kind of policy.
Man, my working group does not.
Okay.
There's some purists there. I don't think they'd like that. Here's my thing about that, wearing my DH chair hat. We let them do that stuff. That's their space.
The server is free to implement any policy that it chooses. If we say that 7084 servers are recommended either to maintain it in stable storage or at least to hash if they can.
I think we could say that. I think we could say those 2 things. Yes. That will add.
All right. Let's take any more of this to the list. We can move on to the next.
This should be positively boring. I apologize for not being Jen. I'm David. This is just a little bit of CLAT sugar. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, there's a clicker. What is the problem statement?
I don't know.
I don't think the clicker works. Can you just go to the next slide? You know how CLAT works, I hope. If anything goes wrong in the network in between, you have a bit of a problem because you can't translate that back because it doesn't map to an IPv4 address. Next slide. Yeah, it's hard to debug. It's annoying for making PMTUD work. It is not a good situation, and it is a very simple problem, to be honest. We need to find some way to translate any errors that originate from the IPv6 network in between your CLAT and the NAS 6.4. Next slide. Next slide again. I'm just going to speed run this. So this is the definition of the network in between. We're calling that untranslatable in the draft. It means that it's not an IPv6 prefix. That's what it is. It just makes it easier to talk about this in a draft. Next slide. And yeah, how do we actually handle this? We want to preserve information about where errors came from when they originate in the IPv6 network in between your CLAT and the Net64. And we do need to do something to put it in an IPv4 packet because we are handing an IPv4 packet back to an application. Next slide. Yes, we want to do this for 3 types of messages: destination unreachable, time exceeded, and packet too big. There is already a dummy address reserved by IANA, and that's what the draft says. Just use that. It's 0.8. It's right next to the addresses your CLAT uses. I don't think there's any conflict with other uses of that address. If there is, then please bring that to our attention because we are reusing the IPv4 address here. We could also just choose a different one. I don't see a reason to do that at this time. Next. Yeah, who here knows how 4884 extensions work? I don't care. This makes use of them. This does need a little bit of fudging on the details to make it work in the translation. I think that's on the next slide. Can you go? Yeah. This does just use the extensions in 4884 to add a node identification object. This is Brian's draft, right? No, not Brian. Bill's. Yeah, this is Bill's draft. That is the primary change on this from last time around. There was a case of convergent evolution. We did the same thing at the same time. So this draft just says use those extensions. There is no encoding in this draft anymore. We are pointing at Bill's draft and saying just use the extensions that Bill's draft is defining and put those in ICMP packets. Next, please. Yeah, we are adding, well, we have a bunch of text on when to do this, how to do this, what addresses to put there, but it's relatively obvious. You just put the IPv6 address in the ICMP extension, and that is an IPv6 address in an ICMP v4 packet, which, well, it is what it is. Next slide, please. Yeah. I think I already said this, but yeah, we do need to modify the packet because in most cases we don't have 4884 extensions when the packet arrives. So we need to put them on. That wasn't originally how 4884 was written. So this is, well, extending that a little bit. It doesn't make a huge amount of difference in how any of this works. It just changes where this happens. Because we're dealing with a nice ICMP-v6 packet that came in with that does not have these extensions, and now we are putting them on the v4 packet that we are giving to the application. Yeah, next, please. We are going into quite a bit of detail in the text currently, as in maybe a bit too much. There's a question of ordering. At some point in your stack, your IPv6 packet needs to become an IPv4 packet. Depending on how your code looks like, it might be easier to add the extensions before, after, or anyway in between while your packet is a Heisen packet or anything like that. I do actually think we might be overspecifying this. Feedback is very welcome on this. Removing text is easier than adding text. That's why it's still there. Implementers' feedback very much appreciated. Yeah, and there's also difference in the whether 4884 extensions are allowed regarding the different types of packets. So that might also be a factor in how exactly you handle things. But at the end of the day, what we're saying is the end result should look like you are generating an ICMP v4 packet from the ICMP-v6 error that you got from the middle of your network. You're just going to use the dummy address as a source address, and you're going to put the IPv6 address, the source of the ICMP-v6 error, in the 4884 extensions, and you just need to make that work. Next slide, please. And I think that's it. This is really, in my opinion, quite simple. Any comments? Not everyone at once, please.
Okay, so Tobias Hiewig, MPI Informatics. I'm in general a big fan of the .8 address, also for other things that do not have V4 addresses. I'm personally a bit concerned with the translation of fragmentation needed, because I'm not too sure how well that goes with, well, then having to deal with fragmented packets and stuff. But I think that might even be out of scope.
I don't think we have that in the draft right now. It's limited to 3 packet types, and fragmentation needed is not one of them, as far as I know.
No,
If
so
I'm not wrong.
basically, let me.
Oh no! Oh,
Yeah, so basically, yes. So
it's packet. Yeah.
as far as I know, currently implementations I've seen drop in PassMTU discovery packets, right? I'm not like we don't want to specify what to do with them and how to do PassMTU discovery, but well, strictly speaking, you do know, right? You get packet too big, say for this destination, you send packet too big, right? You still have the original packet inside. So I think it would be very useful if you have PassMTU problem somewhere on your V6 only network. So I do not understand your concern really.
Also, sorry, I got confused. It is one of the types to translate. It's just called packet too big in ICMP
So
V6.
the concern would be if we then have like basically a packet which would be translated to 2 fragments and then end up with IPv6 fragments.
Oh.
So your concern about translating, you see fragmented ICMP? Okay, we can take it offline because I'm very much confused. I probably need more coffee.
We can discuss this.
Okay, let's. I see people in the queue, so
Okay. I have. Well, you're one of them.
Yeah.
I do think this is worth solving. I haven't, I looked at. I haven't looked too much in depth in the details. It looks a bit complicated, but I think it's.
I do think it looks complicated because we're over specifying, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it is useful, definitely useful to like. One thing I would mention is that we do need to like. There is definitely value in translating this into a packet too big that makes it back to the V4 stack, and for that you probably do need an address, because you need an address. Well, you need an address that when you do a routing lookup on it, it will find the route that it needs to update, right?
You're arguing if there's different gateways that are replying with different MTUs.
So you ought to for that one, you need, because you know how Linux does PTB, right? What it does is it gets the packet, like does the routing lookup on the, you reverses the source index, does a routing lookup, and then like applies the result to that route, right? Or applies it to the sockets, right? And so if the routing lookup goes to this fake address, maybe it's fine because you have a default route on the CLAD interface, but then think about that.
Ooh.
So wait, are you saying we need a route for this fake address pointing to your CLAD default gateway?
It's a default already, so maybe it will work.
I think it will work. So
look at how PTB is processed by common implementations. Like on Linux, you can, better than I do. So as long as it like works, yeah, that's great. I think maybe it will if you pass it from 192.0.0.8. It'll match the default route. Should work, I guess. Maybe, but let's make sure that it does, because there's the value there is like it gets stored in the socket, because I think Linux doesn't even store it on the root anymore, right?
The real question is, it's definitely going to get stored in the V6 cache structures, because it's processed as a V6 packet before it even reaches the CLAD, right?
You don't even own that address. Well, maybe.
Yeah, Jelinkovich, trying to remember what I was going to say. Yeah. So if people think we are over specifying how exactly to do the translation, that's fine. I think most of the text actually came because Bill read the draft and suggested that we need to be more specific about how to add the extension structure if there is already extension structure, or how to add new one, and how do we recalculate checksum and all that kind of stuff, right? But maybe we can just say you're supposed to generate a new ICMP v4 packet which has everything done correctly, and leave it to implementers to recalculate checksum and so the stuff. Yeah, so I'm happy to remove the text. And basically, the main reason this draft is here is because 7915, which is IP and ICMP translation between V4 and V6, was done in this group. And we actually adding one sentence to that RFC saying, if you're translating ICMP V6 to ICMP V4, or vice versa, please follow recommendations in this draft if the address is untranslatable. That's all, right? Because currently, as far as I know, most CLAT implementations just drop those packets. So like, I don't know how to translate.
If there's an implementation that doesn't know how to do the fancy ICMP-v6 extension stuff, is there some like easy thing that such implementations can do? Like basically say
they
just
would-
translate it into a packet that makes a bit more sense than this other one and it's going to pass the Bogon filter or something.
I guess it could just use, can do the first part. It could add Bogon, like dummy IPv4 address as a source without preserving original information. So your traceroute will look less fancy. It will show you the same hop over, like for all hops, same address for all hops. Yeah, so I don't think, I don't remember if you're saying this, so it's just, we can say it explicitly. So if you cannot do translation,
yeah, the core point is translate it at all, please,
Yes,
and use the dummy address. If you can't do the extensions, we can make that optional. Well, I would rather have the extensions.
And the dummy address is the same for all CLATs on all interfaces?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, this is exactly the kind of feedback we're looking for. Right now, it's this one dummy address that is already reserved. If we have good reasons, we can just move to different addresses and or multiple different addresses.
yeah, because original version first time presented actually asked Kayana for dedicated subnet, right? I don't see the reason for having more than one address. If you have more, if you need one address, it's here already. Speaking about optional stuff, like we are updating translation algorithm, right? Maybe your implementation of translation algorithm does not support that fancy stuff. Well, that's
it would be very odd to be able to translate an ICMP packet and then
Yeah.
not be able to add a few bytes to it. I gotta say.
BPF is hard. One thing I'd recommend is how does this interact? Like, especially if you're using one source address for all the CLATs on all the interfaces. If you're doing it on separate interfaces, that's probably fine. If you're doing it for multiple CLATs on the same interface, where this or the 5-tuple thing or whatever, do you need separate addresses? Maybe you do. I don't know, because if those 5 tuples hash on the wrong CLAT or whatever it is that you're doing, my head hurts. So I don't know. But like, think about it. If you understand that other thing, then figure out if you need a separate address.
I did not know CLAT is so complicated. So are you saying we need the same number of dummy addresses as we have CLAT addresses? So they need to be one-to-one matched.
If you understand it, maybe you know. I'm just asking.
I have no idea.
I think we're done.
All right.
Okay, I think the next one is Tim.
So I have to stand here.
You can control slide.
Yes.
yourself.
Oh, okay. Couldn't do that in my group. Right, hi, I'm Tim Chown. This is a draft that we discussed we didn't discuss this draft, we discussed this issue in the last meeting, and someone said it would be a good idea to revive this draft from its vintage 2011, like a fine bottle of wine that's been sat on the data tracker shelf, gathering dust. And here it is again. So Dale and Chris have kindly added their names to help me flesh the text out. So just as a reminder of the rationale, with V4, a lot of enterprise campus admins have this familiar model of DHCP v4 and its linkage to MAC addresses to have some feel for address accountability and user accountability. And with V6, a common question I get when I speak to university people, they're looking to deploy V6 is, oh, how can I have this accountability when I've got all these addresses, all these temporary addresses, et cetera, what can we do about that? So the idea of this draft is just to document the things you could use without, at the moment, any recommendation is to use one of them in particular, but just to itemize what we've got, and then we can think if there are recommendations you want to make. So the things that are listed in there so far, there's the classic switch router polling with SNMP. You have to be mindful to poll rapidly enough so you don't miss things that have been inserted and then removed. There's the recording all ND traffic option via syslog or other means. There's running DHCP-V6 only, though not everything supports IANA. Cough, cough. In university environments, we now have very wide use of, and we have it here, Eduroam, which is a federated authentication infrastructure that's sort of global, but that mandates use of 802.1x. So that gives you some accountability for devices that auth to layer 2 essentially that way. There's the new thing since 2011, which is the address notification draft, which I think is in the DHC working group rather than here. Oh, well, of course, yeah, it says DHC in the auth 48. Okay, so it's almost out. So that I think originally started off as a DNS registration thing, and now it's basically an optional way for hosts to notify DHCP v6 server of the addresses they've generated. So you've got that, but it's optional, so a bad guy or girl might not use it. We've got prefix per host, which kind of moves the goalposts a bit to prefix accountability rather than address. And someone else mentioned there's the Savvy option as well, potentially. So that's what's in the draft. Had some comments from this already. So there was someone pointed out I loosely used the word privacy rather than temporary, so that will be fixed. I think it was Dale or Chris mentioned, particularly in ESNet where they work, they're using streaming telemetry heavily. So maybe there's a streaming telemetry type solution to this as well, so you can push rather than suck, I suppose. Another question was, and I think this was David Farmer, there are other things you could do, sort of diving into layer 2 to get some correlations with other protocols. How far do we want to go in that? I don't know. It's just an open question at the moment. There was another comment which was, well, we don't really have anything that talks about v4 address accountability formally. Do we want to make this IP agnostic? My reaction is no, and therefore not mention ARP alongside ND. And for the prefix per host, there were some questions about what size prefixes, but I think that's orthogonal. I think once you're saying the prefix per host, so you're going to use that to try and have accountability by the prefix that's being used rather than specific addresses in it. I don't think it really matters what the size is. Yes, thank you. Right. So we have an open issue tracker. If you want to engage with us that way, feel free. There's some of these things we've been capturing and they're ready to do the next version, and that's it. So if you've got any questions or comments, do we want to adopt this and move it forward more formally? Do we want to just discuss it and just keep it as a draft that we can look at again in 2035 maybe? Do we want to recommend a specific solution for a specific scenario? Open questions. What do you think? Is this worth doing?
Janikova, I think it's useful because we keep hearing from people who, kind of confused. They keep confusing address assignment mechanism with accounting mechanism, right, and so on. So it's definitely worth documenting what could they do, right, in this scenario. However, just can you go two slides back? This one. Yes, I almost got a heart attack. Warren and I once tried to use streaming telemetry to get some ND traffic being reported. And particularly, I don't think you need all ND traffic. You need to know when new entry neighbor cache was created or when a mapping changed between MAC address and IPv6 address, right? Strictly speaking, you do not need changing between stale, reachable, delay, and all this ND state machine. You only need to know very limited subset of it.
You could say the same for the syslogging method as to what level of detail of sys.
Yes, and what I'm getting into is that we did it on Warren's test environment, and we were very impressed with the amount of messages you are seeing even in the test environment. So I am afraid that stuff does not really scale very well, right? Even using streaming telemetry, and it could easily cause DDoS attack, right? So there will be some security implications of doing this, right?
Yeah. So I guess from a scaling point of view, the enterprise or campus might be a few tens of thousands of devices.
Yeah, so like
That type of scale.
yeah, so it's
not
like,
not Warren's home test stub. or
yes, so
whatever it
like
was.
so the scalability of reporting, exporting ND traffic is like very tricky part, right? And the last comment I have is you said how deep we want to dig into L2. The question is, do we really want to have information about addresses being used, or you really want to know who've been using them? Because like just addresses, well, net flow, whatever reporting data will give you that, but I suspect it's not what those people want, right? They want to know what particular device was user even better, right? Was using that address, because MAC address as well, I can change MAC address on my device, and like, but I guess, and without getting .1x, right, and a certificate or some other forms, you do not know, like address on its own doesn't identify anyone. Unless you just want to satisfy regulators without actually trying to solve the problem.
I suppose you could correlate an IP to a switch port, to an office, to a faceplate or something. But yeah. So I think what's missing here is speaking to the people that want the accountability. What is it they actually want it for? What do they actually need? And to understand that as well. But it's, as you say, it's a question that comes up a lot. So having a document that has some solutions in some ways probably useful. Tim.
Yeah, Tim Winters. I think we should do this document. I think it's a great idea. The only comment I have is I've definitely talked to people who want link local addresses. I think you should be clear which ones. Yeah. And Lorenzo asked why. There have definitely been people I've worked with more in my government days who wanted to track link locals and having to explain that to them. So the one thing I would make clear in this document, I don't think you have to tell people how to do link locals, but I would be clear that the document is strictly global addressing tracking. You don't want to go anywhere near a link local in this doc.
So global scopes, that includes ULAs.
Yep.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have to include ULAs for, there's a number of
There's
enterprises.
addresses you might use enterprise-wide.
Yes.
It definitely seems difficult. I mean, I think if we mention link locals, we need to say that you will almost certainly have a partial view, because if that link local address, if you're the RURA, you'll see global addresses because they have to go through you, but otherwise it might be sort of point to point, right? If there really is text for what size prefix or prefix per host, I mean, that doesn't belong here, right?
No, I agree.
Okay,
I think we've already we've deduced that as ARP doesn't either.
Yeah, there is. I mean, we have one address assignment model that uses prefix for host. Sorry, one using arrays and one using PD, and they both use Slack size prefixes. So yeah, let's not reopen that debate here, for goodness sake.
The other thing with link locals, maybe just random thought out loud, is that if you're in a V4 only network and everything's V6 enabled, there will be V6 link local traffic. So it might matter in some way there, maybe. But yeah, I think focusing on globals makes sense.
Yeah, so Nick Braulio, with no hat on, as someone who gets asked this question also quite frequently within the realm of my day job, thank you for resurrecting this. It's useful because, again, I get the same questions. I think that from the conversations that I've had, what they really want, what the people that are asking for this accountability want, is to tie a user to a network flow. And I think that is typically done via that step-through process that I think you mentioned, Lorenzo. Somebody mentioned, address, MAC address, switch port, office, machine user. So that would be at least my ask, is that somehow that is articulated as one of the reasons for doing some of this. And I had like two other really great points and I've already forgotten them. So maybe I'll get back in the queue.
David Lamparter, I'm having a little bit of deja vu here because the previous session was BES doing EVPN stuff. And they kind of seem to have figured out how to get a whole bunch of IP to MAC mappings into BGP. I think we can maybe steal some ideas there.
We exported
Yes,
all
we can
via
totally
BGP.
do this in
Forget
BGP,
streaming
but-
telemetry. We should
Yeah,
be using
everyone just
BGP.
runs BGP.
No. What I'm saying is you have mechanisms already to figure out what addresses are and what MAC addresses there are. And BGP has the capability to import and redistribute these. And whatever they are doing there, I can't actually cite it. That might also be worth pointing to. Equally, for Savi, there's also DHCP lease query, for example, where you can just have the DHCP server keep telling you what is going on.
Okay.
And that was also discussed for EVPN, for multi-homing. So there is more existing
That looks
stuff,
like
I
a good
think.
one to add.
And yeah.
So I think what we see happening here is maybe for these things, without recommending ones, try and put the sort of context and pros and cons for each of these, plus the one or two others that have been mentioned.
I need to clarify. I'm not saying you should do EVPN. I'm saying EVPN has somehow figured
Could
out
learn
things
from
to
it,
do
yes.
here. Look at what they did.
Right. Thank you.
That was actually my other good point is I don't think we
okay.
should recommend. We should just lay out all the options.
Okay. And the last thing.
I don't remember.
Janiko, I want to respond to David. You know that actually one of the motivation for PD per device work was that if you do an IP tracking and you use a BGP route for every single IPv6 address in your network, it suddenly introduce a very interesting scaling requirement to your equipment, and as a result, some financial requirement for your network and so on. So if you're talking about BGP stuff, you're probably doing PD per device, and it's going to be 1 route per host instead of 20 routes per host.
So Tobias Fiebig, RFC 8950 enthusiast, and I only want to echo again what Equi said. We have really awesome methods to turn layer 3 into layer 2 addresses with NDP. That also across AFIs, and that might be an interesting path forward.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully that'll be minuted or sent to the list.
Tommy Jensen, Microsoft. Please don't use BGP. Just don't. More generally, thank you for doing this work. I think the draft is interesting. I also have day job voices coming to me saying, hey, IPv6 isn't secure because blah, blah, blah. But yeah, not BGP.
Okay. That was it.
Oh, yeah, I closed the queue because I thought we were going to have a lot. Yeah, we got a minute left. Go ahead. I'll unlock it.
I think it would be valuable to say at the beginning what it is that we do have today, maybe even mention what we have in IPv4 and explain that is, maybe don't go into too much detail saying that it's, because it's not perfect, right? For example,
I
you
think
can
it
change
does say
packages.
there's this comfy pair of slippers that's not foolproof at all. It's but people are familiar with it and like it and are a bit scared about the new V6 world.
And maybe we say, here's what constitutes parity with that,
right?
Which has, and you can briefly say, well, which has a couple of limitations, most obviously, blah, blah. I don't go into, but we do need to say that because otherwise people are very confused. They're like, oh, it's secure. Our own security team was confused. They're like, oh yeah, like you can't do this on IPv4. I'm like, no, yes, you can. Here's my new IPv4 address. Is it in your ACLs? And they sort of like disappeared. So people are confused about what is possible today.
Okay, thank you.
30 seconds, David Lambert again. It's also the reverse case. Everything that's listed here is a privacy consideration for some people who don't want to be tracked, just to point that out.
So, yeah, so that was, where was it? Yeah, the penultimate point there with 15 seconds to go is we could discuss privacy versus management tussle in 13 seconds, 9 seconds. But we won't, thank you.
Please don't do that either.
Okay. I started this some years ago. At the beginning, there was some good inputs, but suddenly didn't got any additional input. So 1 year ago, I submitted a new version, and I think 1 month ago, or even less, I submitted version number 8. Basically, there are very, very few changes from the previous version, just a couple of editorial inputs that I got from the list. And also I included IPv6 mostly definition because some people start to ask about it. What is the problem? The problem is people is still getting confused. When you talk with customers or even engineers, they don't really understand what is IPv6 only. I will show now one example. And I think the only way to fix this is to say in the case of, for example, IPv6 only, IPv4 is not being forwarded natively. And especially the most important thing is to state the scope. So we cannot say in general, this network is IPv6 only. We need to say which part of the network. This is one example. This is one network which residential customers, corporate network, cellular customers, and we could say this is an IPv6 only network. Actually not, because if we go to the residential part, in the LANs, we have dual stack, right? The one is IPv6 only, and so on. So we really need to say IPv6 only or IPv4 only or dual stack, specifying the scope, which part of the network we are talking about. This is the overall definition. In other words, in this case, IPv6 only is where IPv6 is native. That's it. So we may have IPv4 on top of that, but it's not native. It's some translation or encapsulations or whatever. These are the terms that I defined as examples because there may be some others, but I think this is the basic terminology that we will use in most of the cases, probably just a small subset in many of the networks. But the idea is to make sure that most of them are included in the document, and the document explains how to create new definitions if you need that. At the beginning, I had only a couple of them, IPv6 only, IPv4 only, and most of the others were coming from the discussion in the list. I think it was in version 4, version 5, or something like that. That's it, basically. I think it's time for working group adoption. And so the question now here is, do you have any additional inputs or whatever? I want to say something I forgot at the beginning. In many working groups, there are definition documents, but we don't have definition documents here. I think it's really, really important.
Jelinkova. First of all, I would slightly disagree with your definition of V6 mostly because I assume there is a NAT64, which does not necessarily have to be there. You can do it without it if you know that you don't need it and so on. On one hand, I agree that we need the definitions. There is a risk there, so, however. When you start to play this game of definitions, there will be always people coming with counter examples or corner cases when your definition does not work, right? Basically, you try to define what the table is, and people will come up with examples of the like bars tool, which could be used as a table if you really need to do this and so on, right? So I have like slight concern that if we put definitions, you kind of limit in other documents which will try to reuse the term for particular scenario, right? Because like, for example, you're saying what IPv6 only is a network which does not provide or manage IPv4, right? Right. Well, it might be that it's provided before but does not manage it and so on, right? Like I'm not sure, would it be better to have those definitions or leave them to the documents which use them to define them in the like framework of particular document of set of documents. So we don't have a problem when I want to use in another document the term V6 only or IPv4 only. Like we did it actually for CLAT draft, right? We use the term if host does have native IPv4 connectivity, please turn off CLAT. And then the discussion started was native v4 connectivity means. We ended up talking about default gateway because you might still have v4 connectivity on link without default gateway. You might have IPv4 subnet assigned without default gateway. Is it V6 only network? Is it v4 enable network? Like, does it have native v4 connectivity? I'm really afraid we're gonna like draw, like it will be an avalanche of detail and we never converge.
I think the main problem, basically, if I understood correctly, what you want to say is that some documents may have a different definition, right? But that's the reason what I am insisting is that the important thing here is not, let's say, the definition itself, but making sure that you set the scope when you mention IPv6 only or IPv4 only. So you say IPv6 only in this link, or IPv6 only in the LAN, or dual stack in the LAN, or whatever. I mean, I think that's the key point.
Yeah, echoing a lot of the things that Jen said. I mean, I don't think if we took all the people in this room, we asked them like, what is IPv6 only? I think you'd get maybe 5 or 6 different things. So I don't, yeah, okay, maybe more. But I mean, I think, and the thing is like, I don't think we need a definition. Not only, you know, and as Jen said, like having a definition will be limiting to future documents, right? That you might use that term to do other things. But I also don't see the value of having a definition. You need a definition when it, you know, you need to publish a definition when doing so makes the conversation easier. The fact that this has not been, you know, really a problem for a while suggests that we don't really need a definition of V6 only. We sort of like kind of, it's context dependent, and I don't think we need one fits all, nor can we. So yeah, I don't think it's useful.
What you call context is what I call a scope. I think basically is
no.
It's the
I mean
same.
the context of the conversation. Like within a given document, it's clear what V6 only is, right? Within, you know, if you're talking within a, you know, even like within a mobile network, you know what V6 only means. You probably mean the radio layer. Maybe your management, you basically say our mobile network is V6 only. You've got a bunch of V4 stuff. Maybe the GTP tunneling's over V4, but that's not what you're talking about. So, so context, yeah. Within a given document, within a given standard, yeah. So I don't think there's value.
To be honest, when I started the document, I had only a couple of definitions. It was the working group who keep adding definitions. So for me, it was easy to say, just define IPv6 only and IPv4 only, and that's it. And I think that may be easier. So I am happy to go back to that direction. But it was the working group that told me we need to define more scopes, again, as examples of definitions. I don't know. So additional inputs.
There's a bunch of people in the queue.
Oh.
Paolo Volpato, Jordi, I see value in your document. You make me think that in RFC 9386, which is about IPv6 deployment, it was published more than a year ago, we try to put some definition. So I think you can take some of the work we did here, and I'm also available to contribute to you.
Yeah.
Tommy Jensen from a vendor who shall remain nameless, who hasn't implemented CLAT yet. I strongly disagree with those in prior queue. This is super useful to have a centralized set of definitions. The fact that you've again got the interest to put them shows that. And I'd much rather have the debate about what terms mean on one document rather than repeat that process for every document we've been writing. We just did that for the CLAT recommendations draft, where we're like, well, what does IPv4 only mean in the first place? Wouldn't it be nice if we could have said as defined by RFC 12345? Hopefully it doesn't take that long. Yeah.
Happy to take co-authors. I have already one more volunteer, but happy to take more co-authors.
Yeah, Lorenzo just signed me up for that. And actually, yes, I would.
Okay, thank you.
Tim Winters. So a couple things here. One, as an author of the USG V6 profile, we defined V6 only, but it's a little bit different. The context there we did was for the device, right? So it's a little bit different. I don't know how you want to handle that, whether you want to just say it's V6 only networks. It gets dicey, as you point out on your picture, right? I mean, we've always struggled with this. I think I defined it too in the Ready Logo program. I would suggest you look at the text for both of those. You know, for devices, we always get into fights about loopback addresses and sockets, and I don't enjoy any of that. I think this is you're running up a noble hill. The thing I'd be careful of is boiling the ocean here. I think you guys can I think we can get some agreement on some text. I think I think we should be happy with that and move on. I don't, this document could exist forever. Having, been down this road a couple of times in several different forums. I do think it's useful. I think people hear V6 only and don't understand the context of it. So that part I'm on board with. I'm just a little nervous with the people in this room. This could go on for a while. And so that would be the thing I'd caution you about.
Thanks.
So Nick Braulio, again, no hat, with the day job that I have, having further definition outside of the profile that Tim mentioned that defines what V6 only is in a document that is, a respected document would make my life so much easier. And I suspect that is a common statement for a lot of different people because, so context is key. I think, as Lorenzo said, it changes based on the conversation. When you have a conversation with a vendor, so to speak, you may have a very different idea of what IPv6 only means than what that vendor does, or IPv6 support is the example that I always use, but V6 only is also something that varies dramatically based on what the device is, where it sits in the network. End host has a reasonable definition, but all the other pieces of that are sort of vague. And that makes writing RFPs and tenders extremely hard, laborious, I guess, not hard. And it also makes conversations, that have to be repeated over and over always happen. So I do see value here. I know it's very hard. And like Tim says, it's a noble hill and it will probably take forever. But I see value, I guess.
It depends on the effort that we put, and maybe what I am missing right now is instead of just the scope and try to define context as well.
Yeah, scope is really important. Scope and context are the key to any chance at success.
David Lamparter. The value I see in this is that it's a place that lists all the different aspects that can be V4 only or V6 only or mixed or whatever. And as someone both reading and sometimes writing drafts, the number of times I've shot myself in the foot by getting something, by failing to consider something is quite something. So I think just having a place, not even about the definitions, but just about the things that you need to make us to think about to have the term clearly defined is valuable. Like when you are talking about V6 only network, what are the questions that? Yeah, sorry, this is very meta confused.
Hi, Bob Hinden. This is sort of mostly a question. So we have a lot of documents here and another in 6-man that have terms defined. So you need to be careful to not redefine them without changing the document. So this could get really messy really quickly.
Yeah.
So so you're going to need to do a lot of research or investigation to see if there's any conflicts. And this discussion about what these terms mean could go on for a very long time.
Philip Teasel. Yes, struggling with terminology is our daily business, and especially with these terms, it's extremely painful. On the other hand, I quite understand that people here are very reluctant to have a definition that maybe screw up a lot of things that are going on or have already been published. So I see value in that document. I think it's extremely valuable to have one place having all the definitions, but I'm not sure whether it's actually a working group document or a very well curated page on some of the IETF pages that has pointers to all definitions, perhaps even conflicting definitions, to give an idea what it could mean. So in a very similar mindset as David, I just want to...
Okay, Tobias Hiebig, and I am active in GROW, Global Routing Operations Working Group, and I have a draft there, something, Global Routing Operations Terms. And that is indeed somewhat similar to the thing the DNS people are doing. As the DNS people have this like authoritative document which says like these are the terms, and they also change things like in bailiwick is no more, etc., etc., etc. And we figured out that routing people are a bit special and might not be that good at continuously A, maintaining a document, and B, coming to consensus on how to name things. Hence, Nick Hilliard proposed that we do more like French dictionary approach. So we don't define terms, we document how these are being used in an informational document. So we don't have like this whole definition issue, but instead we have like, well, some people say peering and mean this, other people say peering and mean that. And it's
something like common usages.
Common usages with context, without the approach to like without the claim to authority. And at the same time, we're trying to do that as like an eternal draft document. So we A, don't get around to having to reach consensus all the time to keep it updated because the world changes around us, and B, to be really forced every 6 months to update it.
Tommy Jensen. I think that's actually a really good idea because dictionaries can have multiple definitions and it still solves the problem for future drafts to be able to say, as defined in RFC, blah, 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 profile 2. It's still a reference, and I would love that. I do think ideally it would be nice to have a central repository of terminology, but at the same time, then we have a shifting base. And if a draft is then published as an RFC that references it, that definition can change out from underneath it. So I do think it's good to put into an RFC.
Thank you.
Richard Patterson. I want to say, yeah, I think I do agree with having somewhere to have these definitions, having just struggled to cite places for some of them myself, which brings me on to the next thing, which is just to help increase the size of the ocean for you to boil. You mentioned IPv4 as a service in the document, which is great, but it's not included as one of the definitions. And yeah, I found it, couldn't really find somewhere to reference what IPv4 as a service actually was. Is it software? Even the software documents don't really talk about it. So yeah, yeah. If you can add IPv4 as a service, great.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, we're a little bit over time. Thanks for the discussion.
Chao Chang, you are the next.
Hello, everyone. I'm Chang from Chinese Unicom, and today my discussion is about IPv6 network monitoring. Oh, sorry. Okay. Monitoring deployment analyze. And we all know that for the IPv6 deployment that there may have a long term for its innovation, like the inception of IPv6 in the 1980s by IETF, and it is a standardization in 2013, and also for the travelers here, there are mainly four aspects. That the first one, it is the technology advantage, and the second one that the cost reduction, and the third one, it is about the demand incentive, and the last one, it is about that the policy of facilitations. They are all the drivers for what and why, and for how we deploy that IPv6 technologies, and to improve its traffic in our network, is also in backbone network and access side of China Unicom. And there are the IPv6 support status monitoring programs that I think it is an old program that it have lasted for many years for that like the limitation of monitoring coverage. They're about the limit to in regional or specific the networks, and the core nodes are not promised while the edge node are negative. And for the insufficient monitoring depths, there is a shortfall in the depth of IPv6 support status monitoring. And for the last one, that limitations in the perspective monitoring, it is about now some methods are predominant security focused, and there's a need to consider broader spectrums of network operation perspectives. And there are also many some more problems here, like the lack of integrated analyzed method and lack of in-depth analyze models. For example, that data silos exist across a professional domain, and it is difficulty in conducting a prospective analysis due to interoperability issue, and also to now consider the impact of our behaviors, market dynamics, and policy change in IPv6 support status. And we now have the RFC, the 18.6, about which focus on the statistics regarding the status of IPv6 deployment, and it is needed in deep technology research and standardization, focus on monitoring method, integrated analyze method, interface models. And now I want to share some case that when we deployed and IPv6 technology in our China Unicom's backbone network. Also, the most important part of our the whole IP network. The case one, it is about that IPv6 network end-to-end quality analyze. There are the first scenario. It is about when user A experience network congestion while playing cloud game at home, in many affect the gaming experience. It is necessary to identify the cause of the network congestion. However, each network domain is managed independently and cannot directly analyze the data association and inference between each domain. And so the conclusions is about the latency and packet loss data for segment. Like here, the figure like N1, N2, and N3 could be connected to achieve poor quality bounder position based on IPv6 network end-to-end monitoring method. And the second case, it is about the home broadband networks. The second scenario, it is about a network operator detect a sudden drop in the proportion of IPv6 traffic in a certain areas. There are many factors that can lead to such a drop, such as the addition or respective of terminal devices by home user in the area, and an application vendor which is a service for a short resource period that support IPv6 to one that only support IPv4. It is also a dual stack solution situation. The IPv6 network quality in the area has a determined and service automatically service to IPv6 traffic to ensure the quality of service. So the conclusion, it is necessary to connect the relevant data and find out the reasons for the sharp decrease in the proportion of IPv6 traffic based on the IPv6 network end-to-end monitoring method. For the next step of China Unicom, mainly in two aspects. The first one, it is seeking solutions like the platform for monitoring and analyze IPv6 support statutes, and also the solidicate comment and refine the draft. That's all. Thank you.
Any questions, comments? I guess if not, I would suggest everyone read the draft and make comments on the list.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Jordi, you are next.
There's no slides for this one, right? This is your.
Yes. I uploaded them. You approved it because I got a message.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Yeah, it's been a long week. There we go.
Yeah. Okay. Right before the pandemic, I already suggested that we should do this. The basic thing here is that 464XLAT together with NAT64 and DNS64 clearly are the most successful transition mechanisms in terms of users or subscribers or whatever you want to say. And other transition mechanisms, especially IPv6 only, like DS-Lite, like Wave4/6, MAP-T, MAP-E, are all standard documents. However, 464XLAT is not a standard document. It's, if I recall correctly, informational. So what I am suggesting here is to bring at least 464XLAT to the same status as the rest of the IPv6 only transition mechanism. And maybe one further step, which is STD. This is the document that explains the maturity levels of the internet standards. I am not going to read it. I checked that all the documents that I am going to mention now already fulfill the requirements, so that should not be a problem. The actual situation is that we have NAT64 and DNS64 as a standard track. So my suggestion will be to move them to internet standard. 464XLAT is informational. We discovered before, with a discussion with Jen, that it should be at least for 6 months a standard track document before moving it to standard. So probably if we want to do that, is 2 steps. First, we move 464XLAT to standards track, and then after 6 months, we can consider to move it to STD. There are additional couple of documents that are also standards track that I think maybe is also interesting to move to STD. They are used by several protocols, several IPv6 only and IPv4 as a service protocols, so it should be interesting. And that's it. My goal will be to have version 0 of each of these documents, and I will personally do that during Christmas, basically, to have the version 0. Already got some other people interested in contributing, so I will not be alone. And then we can see in Bangkok what is the status and decide if we ask for working group adoption or whatever. And that's it. Thank you.
So I'm not sure that 6877 as currently written should be a standard, right? I mean, what ended up being widely deployed isn't really even described in 6877. Actually, it's sort of 6877 has this scenario where you have this PLAT that's sitting in an internet exchange, which I don't think anybody really ever used. And the stuff with which hosts do, which is using one IPv6 address to translate to, is a sub bullet of a corner case that is like just buried somewhere in there. So I don't think we can just elevate it as is. If we want to say that it's a standard, we need to sort of kind of rewrite it to explain what it is that we're doing right now. And I think what, the document that Tommy and Jen are working on maybe is a sort of a better document to publish as standard than that one, right? I think 6877 it was done in V6OPS partly because it was just like seen as putting together existing technology. And that's why it's not even a specification, really. It doesn't say how things should behave. It's like, well, you put these two things together and then you deploy it like this and it works. It doesn't even say how it should work. So it's not really even a protocol specification. So, I don't object to maybe like moving it to full standard, but the document as is will need a lot of work to get there.
Yeah. I am not saying it's an easy work. I understand what you mean and agree, but I'm not sure if it makes sense then to have some additional text in the document from Jen to do that. Maybe it's one possibility. I don't know. Didn't consider it that possibility before.
Yeah, given that we're working on that document anyway, or probably will be. I mean, I think it's working group document, right, Claton?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Changing to standards track.
I think it's better there because like there's a lot of things that we mean when you say 464 XLAT, and almost none of them are 6877. They're all written there in this document. Whether that should be a full standard given the bunch of like complicated corner cases that it has.
Well,
also,
that's another step. Yeah. And it needs six months at least. What do you think, Lorenzo? If I might ask, Lorenzo, what do you think about the other documents? NAT64, DNS64.
DNS64 is going away, right? Nobody uses it anymore, or nobody wants to use it anymore, right? So DNS64, I don't know, maybe, but if you say if the statement is, oh, we're going to promote these to standards because people use them. Yeah, DNS64 is going away, and NAT64, yeah, and maybe the only ones that you said, maybe are actually maybe more interesting because like SIIT, like the stateless translation, that is actually something that hasn't changed, right?
Yeah.
Oh, it's a full standard, full.
No, it's a standards track, but it's not internet standard.
I mean, yeah, 6145, 6146, those actually do maybe make more sense. I don't think anything's changed in those forever.
Exactly.
Well, there's the. Right. And then actually, was it 6145 that had like the multiple different formats for this NAT64 thing where like you could put it in the middle or something? Is it that one? Yeah, so we should delete that.
Yes, so just generally go click and comment. So 7915 is what obsoletes 6145. Yes, it's proposed standard, right? So yeah, we already have a standard document, which is not a full standard. I'm next in the queue. Great. Hello again, John Linkova. So we already talked before the session. I'm not really understand how world gonna be a better place if you change a particular document from proposed standard to full standard. It's but if you have energy to do this, it would make sense. However, obviously, we need to ensure that those documents are stable enough. Speaking of DNS64, I think we should work on getting rid of it instead of promoting it to full standard. So I'm very much against making it a full standard.
Some operators will not agree with you.
Fine. What would be really nice to promote to standard eventually is talking about how hosts should do local synthesis in the stack. All those things I don't understand because I don't write host codes, right?
That's part of the happy able.
No, not DNS64, right? Not DNS64, but proper, I wish Tommy Pauli was in the room. Like what Apple does with the API, right? When you do not need DNS64 for all those things to work. So we need to work on actually actively getting rid of it. So yeah, I would definitely oppose DNS64, but for stuff which is already proposed standard, I don't know, doesn't really matter.
But you don't oppose, in principle.
I never oppose work which I found harmless.
Okay.
Ouch. Tommy Jensen, Microsoft. So I support 464 XLAT becoming an internet standard. I don't think 6877 is anywhere near ready for that. I read all of its dependencies recently in depth. Ask me why. And 6877 has 0 normative requirements except for the one it quotes in a definition of a term. And that cascades into an actual circular conflict where it references 7915 and says it has to do this, or sorry, whatever 7915 replaced. And then 7915 extends what can be used. And if I were to read it strictly, there isn't consensus on what is defined as 464 XLAT addressing behavior. There's only what people are doing today. So did you want to add to this?
I guess slightly, yeah, I looked in 6LAT documents basically tells you how you put pieces together, right? So there is not really nothing normative there. So I don't understand how we can make it standard. I obviously would support making our draft standard, yeah, because we actually have normative language there.
The problem is though 464 XLAT end to end we don't discuss, and it should be written down, which means really we're talking about rewriting the whole thing. And I do support that, but it will take slightly more than 6 months. On the DNS 6.4 track, I'm fine with DNS 6.4 not being killed, but I will point out we're attempting to deprecate 7050. So when we redefine 464 XLAT, maybe we should go with what we're talking about, not even mention 7050 in the first place, and maybe not PCP.
Yeah, I was already considering that, not mentioning anymore 7050 in any of the documents. So for me, that was clear.
Hi, Bob Hinden. 3 sort of hopefully not conflicting thoughts. Generally, I support moving things to standard. We put a lot of effort in 6-man. You don't need to revise documents if you're not changing them to advance them this. So you had a slide about doing 0, 0. So you only need to do that if you're going to update them. So there may be not as much work. My other thought here is it seems to me that in the transition, the next big step is, IPv6 only or mostly, whatever we're calling it. And maybe those are the documents we want to put a lot of effort into advancing in the standards track. And we don't need to worry so much about the ones that we're going to leave behind.
Yeah, one of the reasons for some of the documents to be updated, and that's why I mentioned version 00, is what I just said, that we want to remove, or at least is my opinion, we want to remove the reference to 7050, to the heuristic discovery of the prefix, the NAT64 prefix. Okay. Okay. Solve it.
So Warren Kamari, Google, just following on from what I think Tommy said, there's work in DNSOP to deprecate 7050, but it's unclear if the work should actually happen there, or if the work should happen here, or where, because it's a deprecation of a V6 thing.
Mhm.
So we still need to figure out wherever it happens, there should probably be cross collaboration.
Yep.
All right. Well, we are actually 2 minutes over time. I know we had at least one more that we will not have time today to meet, unfortunately. So
done.
Yeah, I think we're done.
We will guess. I guess we will discuss in the list.
Yes.
Probably instead of one generic pool for each of the documents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I think if you check the agenda, there was one more item. I would encourage folks to read that draft, because I think the update happened fairly late, and provide any comments there. And yeah, thanks for coming.
Thank you. Can you put it in?
Oh, goodness.
Yes, please.